Welcome. This is Healthy Communities, a series where we talk about how we build safer, more inclusive communities for everyone through violence prevention. I'm Charity Jordan Rex, Prevention Education Coordinator with Harmony House, Missouri's largest domestic violence shelter. And joining me is Danny Lacio, Equality Organizer with Promo. And one of their mottos is we have to become comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. The more uncomfortable the conversation, the more important it is to have it. Danny, thank you so much again for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and just kind of share my experience.
So those who hopefully watched the other episode that we did with you are tuning in for this one. If you didn't see that, go back and watch that one because Danny makes such a great case and really breaks down the barriers that folks in the LGBTQ community are facing. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men experience domestic violence in this country. And what we know from the data is that that is underreported. There's still a lot of stigma and shame attached to domestic violence. But what we also know is that folks in marginalized communities experience domestic violence at even higher rates. And so that would include folks in the LGBTQ plus community. So previously we talked about some of the additional barriers that they face. There are barriers certainly being a domestic violence survivor, but then there are barriers that folks face in our community and in our society just for being LGBTQ, just for being who they are. And so on this episode, I'm hoping that you can speak to what can we do about it? So now we know what the problem is. You know, we see those barriers, we understand that, but how can a straight cisgendered person help? Why should they care? And what can they do about it?
Thank you for that question. Because, yes, we can go through and learn about things, but we have to be able to put those into actions because that's how we go through and make that change. So, while yes, we have gone through and talked about that, I still encourage, individuals keep educating yourself because even within our community and say language is constantly evolving. So I'm even having to educate myself on things as well. But and like you brought up and say within domestic violence and sexual assault are already very high. And when we look at the LGBTQ community and say, yes, it's even higher. I would say 1 in 2 trans individuals are a victim. So I can go through and say that I myself am a victim. And I'm actually sitting here now thinking, do I have a trans friend that's not a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence? And I'm like, I don't think I do. And that's just so sad to go through and think about that we've all gone through and experienced that. But I also
Okay,
have to go
wait,
through and
wait, I'm going to stop you right there. And I
yeah.
want to just give that comment the space that it needs. Say that, say that again?
That 1 in 2 trans individuals are a victim of domestic sexual assault or domestic violence. And as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, I don't think I have a single trans friend that's not a victim, that hasn't gone through and had something happen to them. And of the ones that I'm thinking and sitting about, they never reported either. So that's the other thing that we have to take into account is these are just the stats on who has gone through and reported. And a lot of times the reason why they don't get reported is we don't feel that it's safe to go through and report because the environment that we would go through and report would not be an inclusive place. So like if I go to the police report and I need to go through and say that this individual harmed me, I'm going to have to dead name myself because the forms are not inclusive for that. I'm going to have to go through and misgender myself because the forms don't go through and allow that. So those are things that our cis community or just the community at whole can go through and do is while I do feel we have come and we've made progress with sexual orientation, it's gender identity that's under attack right now. And kind of to go back with where that came from, in 2015, when same sex marriage became legal in the United States, that's when the white Christian nationalists started pushing back. And they've been reusing, the 1950s and 1960s playbooks of the anti abortion and anti LGBTQ movement. So educating ourselves more on that helps us fully understand the full picture of what's going on and the root of it so that we know how to, impact it. But other things that people can do is take a look at your own workplace and say, do you have pronouns on your emails or on door tags? And say, do you have forms that allow for parent one, parent two, or does it say mother and father? Or does it say wife and husband? And say, just look at those little things. And the more you're educated on that, the more you will notice it as well. And then just call things out. That's the biggest thing. With my mottos, we have to become comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And how you do that is by calling things out. And a lot of times it's easier to call out your family first. And then when you get that comfort, or maybe it's people are opposite and they're like, I can't call out my family. I know those people. So, like, find some way to get comfortable, push your boundaries. And, because we all see things and we're like, that is not okay. So, what would you do? Would you sit back and just let it happen and then go and through and tell your trans and queer friends, I'm so sorry stuff like that happens? Or are you going to be that ally? Because that's the difference between being somebody that's accepting and being an ally. An ally is somebody that keeps themselves educated and finds way to go through and helps break down those barriers, whether that be for our queer community or whether that be for our Black and brown community, disabled. Let's say we need individuals, our allies, to create spaces at the table so that our voices can be there, because you can't represent us without us. So those are things that people can go through to do to help bring more awareness and just opportunities for us to go through and make those changes that our community needs.
Those really are, I think, are two of the biggest, most important pieces that I feel like a lot of people don't understand, because what we know is that we will never have enough shelters. So
Mhm.
when we talk about domestic violence, for example, you're never going to have enough shelters, and more shelters isn't the answer to domestic violence.
Mhm.
And so then you really have to go upstream, and that's where the education piece is, educating yourself on the issues and what's happening, how, instead of just paying attention and taking for truth whatever is coming through on social media, but really kind of going a step further and educating yourself, and then also being willing to call out those harmful social norms. And there are so many.
Mhm.
And I will say that the same harmful social norms that gave us the Me Too era. I don't know a woman that doesn't have a Me Too story. I don't know a Black person that hasn't experienced some form of racism in this country. And yeah, the gay and queer and trans people that I don't know any that haven't experienced issues because of that as well. And so the same harmful social norms make all of that possible. They foster
Mhm.
those harmful stereotypes, those harmful ideas, and that makes a community more at risk for violence. And so maybe we can all work for a state organization and advocate like Danny is, but we can call out those things with the people within our own networks.
Mhm.
Um, so let's say, just as we come to a close, give me an example. Let's say someone hears something, like their friend says something offensive about a trans person. What should they say? Like, how can they address that?
Sure. So let me actually give you an example. So this actually happened with my son, who's in middle school, where somebody had gone through and made a derogatory comment, about the fact that he's got two moms and everything. And his response was, well, what's wrong with that? And when the kid really only had negative things to come back, he just kept giving more information. And it was like, well, providing the information of, well, they have jobs, and say they're doing the same thing that your parents are, and so you see the clothing that I have, they're still providing for me. So it's what he was doing, what my son was doing, was he was taking that negative conversation and he was disproving all of those social norms. He was changing that narrative and everything to go through and, widen that understanding. I mean, that's even something like, today's the first day of school. So it's his first day of his last year of middle school. And he's really excited about going off to high school, but he worries because some kids will go through and still have that mind frame, for example, that Central is a school full of just fighting because it's the black school. And I'm like, no, see, that's a social norm. That's a bias and everything that we have to go through and change. So it's uncomfortable to go through and have those conversations, but that's how you create the change. Is you don't have to make it into an argument where you're like, no, you shouldn't say that. Because honestly, when somebody's yelling at me, my defense goes up and I'm not really listening. So have a conversation, ask them questions. Why are they saying that? Why are you thinking that way? And then try to change that narrative. Because really that's what I'm trying to go through and do even for my kids is I recognize the struggles that I had growing up. And it's not that I didn't have people that didn't love me. I just didn't have the education. I didn't have those resources and support. So I just want to be for somebody what I wish that I would have had growing up. And a lot of that was just people having open conversations and not just being argumentative and on the defense.
I mean, we could talk even longer because there's so much good stuff there. But yeah, educate yourself, talk to the people you know, call out those harmful social norms, and that's going to make much more of a difference than some stranger putting something, making a post on social media. It's going to be the person that you know actually telling you,
Mhm,
hey, have you thought about that? Why do you think that?
mhm,
So it doesn't have to be, I love that you said it doesn't have to be an argument. It's not a debate that we're trying to have. It could just be questioning, well, why do you think that? Where does that come
mhm.
from? Um, and that's where change starts. And when you are trying to make those changes, it is going to be uncomfortable. But I always tell people, if you can just sit with that uncomfort for a little bit, just push past it, there is going to be something so much better on the other side. And I think once we understand that if we can do that collectively, when everyone in our community has the freedom to just live and move and love freely without fear of harm or harassment, that is going to be an incredible community. And I think we can make it happen. Danny, I so appreciate the work you're doing to help make that happen. And thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
If you or someone you know needs help, feel free to give us a call on our 24-hour hotline at Harmony House 417-864-SAFE, or chat with an advocate live on our website at myharmonyhouse.org. Thanks for watching.